Now that we have the model updated, the next thing to take a look at would be the type definition for user. So our user type is no longer valid because, of course, we not only have the name, but we also have a username which is of type string. And I'm not going to add the password to the type. We don't want to reveal that field at all. So now that's done, let's also add a new mutation. So we have make user, we have remove user, and now actually we will probably remove make user later. So let's call this register. And for the registration, so registering a user, we need two things, right? We need an actual string of name. Actually, we need three things. We also need the username, which is a string, and then we need the password, which is going to be the string, and this is going to return a boolean, whether the registration was successful or not. So notice name, username, and password are all required parameters to the mutation, and the boolean, so the register mutation must always return either true or false. So now that we have added this register mutation, we need to go back to our resolver and write the appropriate functionality for the registration mutation. So let's open resolvers here. And let's find this section for the mutation. And after remove user, I'm going to add a register. And we will want to get access to the parent. And then we will extract the name, the username, and the password from the arguments. And we will, of course, work with the models that we have. And then we'll do something here. So what are we going to do? So I'm going to construct a user variable, so user object, just like we did it here, but this time I will add the name, the username, and the password as well. And so at this point in time, we need to do a check, right? So we need to create the user. Now, this particular function, this create function, returns a promise. So we can't just return this because the GraphQL endpoint is going to essentially finish before the promise has the chance, or this model's user to create function has a chance to insert that user into the database, right? So there's going to be a race condition here. So what we need to do is extract this into a variable, and I'm just going to call that registered user. And what I'm going to do is probably should have an if statement here that says if the registered user has an ID, and if that is a number, meaning that the registration was successful because the ID of the user should be a number, then we can say return true. Otherwise, we're going to say return false. Now, this on its own is still not going to work because we can't just have this variable to store the result of this, because this create method returns a promise. A registered user is still going to store the pending promise. But remember, in the previous video, we had a look at async functions, so we can type in async there. And then, because now we are in the context of an asynchronous function, we can then call await to wait for the pending promise to finish, and that's when the code is going to progress. And we could also wrap this into a try catch block and catch all the errors, and just for now log it to the console. And also, if there's an error, we need to return false, of course, so that we adhere to the condition that we set up in the schema definition that the register function at all times should return a Boolean value. All right, so let's fire up our application that runs on port 3000, open up a browser, and here we have our playground. So let's just run a quick query for all the users and list their names. So we have these 3 users. That's great. So let's now run a mutation. And let's see. So we now have register, and register requires a name. So let's pass in Kate. It requires a username. That should be Kate with lowercase, and requires a password as well, which I'm going to type in test4. Right, so let's run this and look at this. Registration true. So let's comment this out. Let's run our query, and now we have 4 users. So let's see what happens when we run the mutation again. And now we get a validation error. And why do we get the validation error? Just check the message. Username must be unique. So basically that username that we provided, Kate, we just inserted it before, so we can't reinsert it now. Perfect. So now this mutation works. And what we should also do is quickly connect to our MySQL instance and verify that the actual user has an obfuscated password, right? Because remember, we set up the user schema in a way that we do not have access to the password, which is the right thing to do. So there's no way to query the actual password from here. So here I use the MySQL command prompt, and let's take a look at the users. And there we go. So number for Kate and the password is in fact hashed. So that's exactly what we wanted to achieve. So now we have the possibility of registering users. Now, what we will take a look at in the next lesson is how to essentially allow people to log in and how to achieve authorization as well as authentication with GraphQL and with Apollo server.